joie.
Merci infiniment, cher Constantin. Merci, chère Tatiana. Merci à tous les collègues, à tous les étudiants. Donc, c'est le 4e et le dernier de ces cours de master, donc ici depuis la Moïla. Et je vais passer donc à la langue anglaise, la langue d'enseignement.
Merci beaucoup, bonne inspiration.
Merci à vous, cher Constantin. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you very much, Larissa, for being here in the classroom, in the historical building of the Mohila Academy. You know how important it is for me to have had through the whole month this academic experience, those exchanges, this dialogue with my colleagues, with the faculty, with the students here at Mohila. And as we all know, day after tomorrow will be the first anniversary of the full-scale invasion. So as a historian, we make a very clear distinction between commemoration and celebration. And certainly it will be a commemoration day and certainly not a celebration. But last Sunday, because each Sunday I have this column in Le Monde, in the French weekly Le Monde, in the French daily Le Monde, I dedicated my column to the fact that, the war against Ukraine, the aggression against Ukraine started in 2014, not in 2022. Yeah? And I really insisted on the memory wall that you have here on the top of the hill as Saint Michael at the Golden Dome. And the following day, well, President Biden and President Zelensky were at this very place to honor all the heroes who fell to defend Ukraine and resisting Russia. And they chose the part of the wall that is dedicated to the fighters, the defenders who fell in 2014. And it's very important that they did that. And that we notice that. So last week, we talked about the Russian-Iranian alliance. According to Ukrainian military, there is, at this very moment, Iranian instructors in Luhansk who are providing some terror techniques, some terror know-how to the Russians to keep on their aggression against Ukraine. So last week, remember the 3 points were no ideology between the Russian and the Iranian regime, the fact that it is a global war on terror on both sides, and the fact that it moved from Syria to Ukraine. So as anybody in the room or online, questions, comments, remarks, requests for clarification about last week's class, please feel free. No? It was all clear? Well, then I will move on. And today, the class is about the post-24 February Middle East. What happened in the Middle East, if I may say, under the shadow of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, what happened, how the region changed, evolved, and how it could still change and evolve. So again, 3 points. The first point will be the Turkish centrality. The second point will be the Syrian nexus. The third point will be oil and oligarchs. So the first point about Turkish centrality. So President Erdogan had been in power for quite a while now, but we generally forget that when he came to power, his Middle Eastern policy was zero problem with Turkey's neighbors. Zero problem. He didn't want any problem with Iran, any problem with Iraq, any problem with Syria. And in fact, he had established a very, very warm relationship with Bashar al-Assad, even opening a free trade area between the northern Syrian province of Aleppo and the southern Turkish province of Gaziantep, the two very provinces that have been hit so dramatically by the recent earthquake. So why did he move to such a strong anti-Bashar stand, at least until now? Because it could still change. He moved because Bashar al-Assad is Bashar. And remember the first class about Vladimir Assad and Bashar Putin. This kind of regime, even when it is in their vested interest to be a little bit more tolerant, to try and give some kind of concession, they are unable to do it because for them it's a zero concession policy. Yeah? So instead of placating Erdogan, Bashar al-Assad and Russia turned him as a bitter enemy. There was even direct provocation, military provocation on the southern border of Turkey, first by the Syrian Air Force, then by the Russian Air Force. So Turkey had to shoot down a Russian plane. And well, you know, there was not exactly a strong solidarity by NATO in this crisis, which can explain why Erdogan moved from this very strong anti-Assad position, supporting the Free Syrian Army, supporting the various coalitions trying to topple the Syrian regime, to a conflicting partnership with Russia in Syria, what is called the Astana process. Why Astana? Because Astana is the capital city of Kazakhstan, and this is where Turkey, Russia, and Iran, but under Russian invitation and Russian auspices, decided to launch a three-tiered process with, in fact, areas of what the Russian called in their Orwellian language deconflicting zones, but were in fact areas of confrontation, but where Turkey, Iran, and Russia were trying to cool down the actions of their various proxies or allies. And interestingly, the Assad regime was not part of the process. And in fact, the whole process was a denial of the sovereignty of Syria, because somewhere in Kazakhstan, out of the realm of the United Nations, well, Russia, Turkey, and Iran were trying to deal with this crisis and the so-called deconflicting zone. So this led Turkey to establish, after 3 direct military campaigns, interventions into Syria, what they call a safety belt, which is very resented by the Bashar regime because it's a denial of its sovereignty, which was aimed not only at the Syrian regime, but also at the Kurdish guerrillas, the very same Kurdish guerrillas that were the allies of the Americans, the French, and the British in their struggle against the jihadi monsters, the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. So to make a very long story short, now you have 3 different pockets of Syrian territories that are under direct Turkish control, with even the Turkish lira being used as a local currency, not anymore the Syrian lira, and with de facto the Turkish military and intelligence being the authority in this part of Syria. And then you have what is called the Idlib pocket. So Idlib is in the northwestern part of Syria, close to the Turkish border. Again, it's one region that has been hit dramatically by the recent earthquake. And this part of Syria is under the control of a Salafi jihadi group that has cooperation, but at the same time competition with the Turkish authority. But what is crucial is that to know is that in Turkey you have 3 to 4 million Syrian refugees, and there is a strong now anti-refugee trend in the Turkish public opinion, and even President Erdogan has pledged to repatriate more or less voluntarily 1 million Syrian refugees. But in this pocket, because everything in the Middle East is not only distressing, it could be worse. You know, there is a saying in the Middle East, who is the optimist, who is the pessimist? The pessimist say, it couldn't be worse. And the optimist say, oh, yes, it could. So it could be worse, because you have in this insurgent-held territory of Idlib, 3 million people minimum. Nobody knows exactly, nobody knows exactly how many people were killed during the recent earthquake. And most of them are already refugees, or at least displaced from the rest of Syria. And for years, Putin blackmailed Erdogan because of this territory. Let me explain. He says that if I would launch an offensive on Idlib, then that means that hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of additional refugees will cross into Turkey, which will have dramatic internal consequence. So you have permanently this blackmailing of Turkey by Russia from Syria, a blackmail technique that has only intensified since the invasion of Ukraine. But at the same time, you have the son-in-law of President Erdogan, who is now very famous in Ukraine, because his name is Seljuk Bayraktar. So Bayraktar in Turkish means standard bearer. But why do you know Bayraktar in Ukraine? Because it's the name of a drone, the TB2, that Ukraine acquired from Turkey back in 2019. At that time, there were 6 Bayraktar TB2 drones. And they have been first used in Donbass against the Russian camp in 2021. And there were some 20, maybe more, that were, as you all know, because there is even a very popular song, Bayraktar here in Ukraine, they were critical in the last days of February 2002 and the beginning of March in destroying Russian convoys, Russian position, and in giving air cover, significant air cover, critical air cover to the Ukrainian resistance and the Ukrainian army. So since that time, the Ukrainian military has intensified its investment in drones. You have drones of all kinds that are being used for intelligence, for offensive, for defensive action. But Bayraktar was key at this critical moment. And what happened is that Seljuk Bayraktar visited President Zelensky last September. And during this visit, it was agreed, and of course, no details are given, and it's logical because it's a very sensitive issue, that Bayraktar can be now produced in Ukraine. So there was a transfer of significant military technology by Turkey to Ukraine. And that was long before what we discussed last time, which is the use by the Russian of the Iranian drones to strike Ukrainian civil infrastructure. So Turkey provided this significant military support to Ukraine facing the Russian full-scale invasion. But despite that, Turkey has been so far the only country that managed to hold some kind of mediation, some kind of talks between Ukraine and Russia. Yeah? So I insist on that because that means that mediation is not forced to be based on military neutrality. Turkey supported Ukraine at a very critical moment. And despite that, or maybe, this is my view, because of that, it managed to have talks in Istanbul, in the very famous Ottoman palace called Dolmabahce, in March 2022. The first and only talk so far between Russia and Ukraine. And as you all know, those talks fell through because Russia was not ready to the minimal concession to give any chance to peace. What is sure is that Turkey has still been a successful mediator. I don't say that it was fully successful. Mediation, and it's a former diplomat talking, is a very difficult art. And very often you have to spend a lot of energy with very limited result. But what is sure is that Turkey went on. It is Turkey and the UN that sponsored the grain export agreement that was essential for mainly the African countries because there was a risk of food crisis in the African continent. So it has been very critical. You all know that Russia tried to sabotage the very agreement they had signed, but Turkey stood fast as a consistent, solid mediator. And you know also that it is thanks to President Erdogan himself that the Mariupol defenders, they couldn't be released in full prisoner exchange because the Kremlin had refused to give that gesture. So they are now, a number of them, host of the Turkish president. And as you know, they had the opportunity to receive their families, receive their loved ones. But the agreement is that Turkey is responsible for them to stay in Turkey because Russia refused them to be repatriated into Ukraine. So this very crucial central role of Turkey in the current conflict has been fully acknowledged by President Zelensky repeatedly, several times. And as you know, again, there was a significant Ukrainian help after the recent earthquake. Ukrainian rescue team have been sent over there in Turkey, and President Zelensky himself went to the Turkish embassy to sign the condolence book. So that was the first part about Turkish centrality. Is there comment, remark, clarification in the room, online?
I have a question, maybe just to conclude your this part of speech. What is the main aims of Erdogan in Syrian conflict? What he really wants to achieve?
Well, as I told you, Erdogan, he moved from zero problem policy first, then to a very warm relationship with Bashar al-Assad, then a very strong anti-Bashar al-Assad position, then into this quite puzzling partnership with Iran and Russia while competing with Iran and Russia at the same time. So now for Erdogan, the main priority is to establish what he called a safety belt, which is de facto a Turkish control area in the north of the country, where he could send back a significant numbers of refugees. I don't think he does that for Syrian reason. He does that for internal reason. So far, the presidential elections that are scheduled for next May are supposed to be held on the same date despite the devastating earthquake. We'll see if the date is kept. And Erdogan, for the first time in his power, could lose this election. Otherwise, he has been consistently winning any election. So this is his challenge, and probably he's tempted to use this repatriation card to win a significant part of additional voters. Okay, no other question? Not in the room? Nobody? Okay, so now I move to the second part, which is the Syrian nexus. So remember the first class, Vladimir Assad and Bashar Putin. When it comes to post-full-scale invasion Middle East, Bashar al-Assad has been with Eritrea and North Korea. So you see the kind of regimes. One of the most consistent supporters of Russia internationally at the UN. And in fact, he went as far as to recognize the sham separatist republics, or quote-unquote republics, of Donetsk and Luhansk, which led immediately Ukraine, and it's quite consistent, to sever the diplomatic ties with the Assad regime. So that means that today there is no more diplomatic relation between the two countries. By the way, Bashar al-Assad had recognized those republics just before they had been absorbed by Putin after this tragical farce of the so-called referendums. So it was really a gesture of loyalty, one could even say of dependence to Russia, more than the expression of any kind of more or less independent, autonomous Syrian policy. But that's logical, because as we saw, Bashar al-Assad is not representing Syria, he's representing himself, he's representing his regime, and the survival of this regime is intimately linked to his relationship with the Kremlin and with Vladimir Putin. At the same time, we saw that in the previous class last week, that Syria, the Syrian territory, physically is at the core of the Russian-Iranian alliance. We saw that it is in Syria that the Iranian developed the Shahed 129 and then the Shahed 136 drones that are devastating in their raid against Ukraine since last fall. It happened in the desert of Palmyra, in the desert of Syria, and this is where this Russian-Iranian alliance really became so substantial before turning it against Ukraine. So Syria, the Syrian territory, I won't speak about the regime anymore, I will speak of Syria as a territory, as a geographical entity, not a political or military entity. Syria as a territory is key for Putin to blackmail two significant Middle Eastern actors. We just saw in the first point of this class how Putin is using his blackmail, his position, his potential offensive against Idlib as a permanent blackmail against President Erdogan of Turkey. And this can explain a lot about the Turkish position, while too often people think of the Turkish position from the European point of view or from the Caucasus Black Sea point of view, the proximity with the Russian territory. But the fact that you have this threat, this Damocles sword hanging over the head of the Turkish president is crucial to understand the way it operates. But the same kind of blackmail is being enforced, is being imposed by Putin against Israel, also from the Syrian territory. Now, so let me go a little bit in the past, and we'll see how it affects the situation right now. We saw about the Russian-Iranian alliance that it is a real full-fledged alliance, and that President Zelensky was very clear and very clear-sighted, in calling it an alliance last fall. But this alliance developed in Syria. But in Israel, the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who had been before in power from 2009 to 2021, failed to understand the depth and the magnitude of this alliance. In fact, he had a completely contradictory vision compared to that of President Zelensky. I will elaborate on that. From the point of view of Netanyahu, Putin is supposed to be his best ally in order to rein the Iranian influence in Syria. So why does Benjamin Netanyahu think that way? First, there are those personal relationships that are pretty strong between Netanyahu and Putin. Netanyahu has been calling in the past repeatedly Vladimir Putin. He praised his action. He probably has some soft point for the way he handles diplomatic matters, because like Putin, Netanyahu can be pretty assertive in his approach, to say the least. And from day one, Netanyahu refused to consider that a regime change in Syria could be good news for Israel. There was a saying in Israel from 2011 saying that is at least an evil we know. And we prefer an evil we know than the unknown. That could be worst. And we have some kind of red lines with him that he's respecting, and on our northern border, and better stick with it, while if there is revolutionary change, nobody knows what could happen. So, de facto, Israel was quite a conservative power in terms of revolutionary change, in times of revolutionary change or revolutionary potential change, to be more explicit, in Syria. So this led quite consistently to a significant, in the beginning, indirect cooperation between Israel and Russia in Syria that became more structured after the Russian direct intervention in Syria in 2015. So Netanyahu believed, he said it repeatedly, that Putin would control and eventually force the Iranian Revolutionary Guard or the pro-Iranian militias in Syria, like Hezbollah, or like the other militias coming from Iraq, from Afghanistan, and even Pakistan. He would force them to stay away from the Israeli border. It never happened because, as you know, by your own Ukrainian experience, but as any Middle Eastern observer can see, Putin is a quintessential arsonist, arsonist fireman. So it's fireman, arsonist, pyromaniac. That is somebody who is, starting a fire in order to say, "Oh, you have to come to me to control it." He has been doing that from day one in Syria. And this is exactly what happened in Syria with Israel. And at one moment, there was a cabinet meeting in Israel where Netanyahu said, well, I think Putin lied to me. And there was a minister who laughed. And there was at that time Lieberman, because Avigdor Lieberman is coming from Moldova. And Avigdor Lieberman, he knows a little bit about Putin and his political culture. And the idea that you can trust Putin, the idea that you can trust his word was totally exotic for him. And he laughed at his own prime minister for believing it. Anyway, that didn't change. You know, Netanyahu, you can say anything about him. I wrote the first and only political biography in French about Netanyahu. He's very consistent. So, despite the fact that he understood that Putin hadn't lived up to his word, he kept on betting on Putin and saying, well, at least he's giving me some kind of possibility, tolerance. I won't go into detail, but that means that when the Israeli Air Force wanted to target Iranian or pro-Iranian position in Syria, they have to get at least an orange light from the Russian Air Force. Otherwise, they couldn't do that. They would be shot. So there would be a direct Russian-Israeli confrontation, and none of the party wants that. So they have managed some kind of device that I don't want to elaborate, which means that when they want to target, and it was the case just a few days ago in the very heart of Damascus, they have to get this orange light from the Russians. So the Russians have managed really, it's impressive, at a very low cost to tie down Israel. Because they don't do it themselves, they don't do anything against Iran, they don't do anything that would jeopardize the Russian-Iranian alliance. They just let the Israelis strike when they want to strike, and after this complex kind of under the behind the curtains agreement. So this understanding has become now crucial for Israel. That means that if Russia would tomorrow refuse to let the Israeli Air Force strike Iranian or pro-Iranian targets in Syria, that would represent a significant break in the security of Israel at its northern border. Yeah? Is that clear? Yes? So, not only has this process gone on, but Netanyahu, he said, well, since anyway Putin has this leverage on me, better be his friend, or at least to be one of his best friends. So that's why Netanyahu was invited on the so-called Victory Day on May 9 in 2018 on the Red Square. You don't have many world leaders who have attended the military parade on Victory Day on the Red Square. Netanyahu is one of them. So he literally fell into this Russian trap. And for Russia, it was critical to have this kind of neutralization of Israel in the Middle East, despite the fact that, as you all know, Israel is the most important recipient of US military aid historically, with billions of dollars spent by the US taxpayers for Israeli defense during the past decades. So that was the policy of Netanyahu until he had to leave power in 2021. His successor was Naftali Bennett, and his successor in March 2022 said, oh, I will launch my own mediation between Russia and Ukraine. He went by plane to to Moscow, then he visited Kiev, and nothing came out of it. And nobody talked anymore about Israeli mediation. But President Zelensky, he talked repeatedly to the Israeli leaders and the Israeli public opinion. His first speech was, as you know, your president has repeatedly addressed various parliaments around the world by video. So he did that with the Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, but it was during the intermission period in the Knesset. So contrary to the other parliaments that President Zelensky had addressed before, there were not a lot of members of the Knesset, not a lot of parliamentary members present in the room. They were also online. And at that time, President Zelensky, he quoted Golda Meir. Golda Meir has been Prime Minister of Israel. She has been one of the leading members of the Zionist movement. She was born in Kiev, and she said, and President Zelensky quoted her, "We intend to remain alive. Our neighbors want us dead. That doesn't leave many room for negotiation." So he quoted her, of course, talking about the Arab leaders, but saying, well, I can quote her talking about referring to Russia. But despite that, despite those very strong words, there was not a popular wave of solidarity in Israel, and there was the fear that was expressed by military and political leaders that Russia would suspend its security agreement with Israel, so they didn't want to give anyway. So President Zelensky made in October, last October, a much stronger and one could say even a bitter speech to the people of Israel. This time he was not addressing the Knesset, he was addressing a forum that was organized by the Haaretz newspaper. And he went and he said, I'm talking to you, people of Israel, while we hear the sounds of the Iranian drones in the night. So that was a vivid, very vivid expression. And he was saying, well, you speak about Iran, you speak about the nuclear threat, where we are living under a direct Iranian threat. And you should help us against this common enemy. Again, this speech didn't trigger any significant reaction in Israel. At that time, the Israeli ambassador to Ukraine, while Ukraine was asking for air defense system, he said, after the victory, we will provide an economic Iron Dome to Ukraine. Okay, after the victory, economic Iron Dome. That's not exactly what Ukraine was asking from Israel. Now Netanyahu is back in power with a very radical government coalition, but he let it known that he might change his position about Ukraine. So it's not because I'm French, but because I'm a historian, that at the beginning of this month, for his first trip to Europe, Netanyahu was received by French President Emmanuel Macron, and it was really like what I just said about Zelensky. They were speaking about Iran, the Iranian threat, but President Macron was saying Iranian drones in Ukraine, and Netanyahu was saying Iranian nuclear threat. But obviously, something came out of this meeting because after this meeting, there was a visit to Kiev, the very recent visit of the Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs, Eli Cohen, last Thursday. That was the first ministerial meeting here in Kiev between the the two ministers with his counterpart Kuleba, and he visited Bucha, the site of the horrible massacre. But still, he didn't condemn Russia. He spoke about innocent victims, but he didn't specify who were the killers. So there was still this caution. But just yesterday, there was another visit, this time by a parliamentary delegation. And as I told you, it's key. The first time President Zelensky addressed Israel, he was addressing the Knesset. So this delegation was held yesterday by Yuli Edelstein. Yuli Edelstein is the head of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Commission at the Knesset. So he has a very central position in the parliamentary system. And what did Yuli Edelstein, who is, by the way, from the same party as Netanyahu, say? Here in Kiev, he said that Israel should stop fence-sitting, should clearly choose its side and its camp in this war. And he went as far as saying that Israel must support Ukraine against the dangerous collaboration of Russia and Iran, quote unquote. So that's really echoing President Zelensky's own words about the Russian-Iranian alliance that we studied in the last class. So you see that there is some movement, even very recently. Is there any questions, remark, clarification that you would like to have at this time? No? Yes, please.
How do Americans Israel is the main ally in America in the Middle East, and how do Americans heard of the world? How do they see this cooperation between Russia and Israel?
Well, as I presented you in the previous classes, America, without being conscious of the negative impact on its global stand, has been through a process of disengaging from the Middle East over the past decade. And it started with Obama not enforcing his own red line in Syria after the gas bombing, which, at least in my interpretation, convinced Putin that it could go against Ukraine, occupy and annex Crimea, and launch the hybrid war in Donbass. So this process is a long-term process. And today, for the first time, I think for decades, we have the Biden administration saying we have absolutely no intention of promoting any kind of peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. We have abandoned this ambition. So this is in this gap that Putin has consistently built, as we saw during the previous classes, his power base in the Middle East, using it against Ukraine and using it globally. So now there's a significant wake-up call for America. But America has its own priorities. Well, Joe Biden was extremely brave to come and demonstrate his solidarity with you day before yesterday. But they certainly, at this stage, don't want to go into any kind of showdown with Israel, even political showdown, or even threatening to reduce their military help. This is something that has a very strong bipartisan support in the Congress. Even the controversial move of the US Embassy by the Trump administration from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Biden said that he was not in favor, but he didn't move back the embassy to Tel Aviv. So in this kind of situation, despite all the public expression of dismay of the Biden administration with the current Israeli politics, they don't want to enter any kind of even pressure process. So they are certainly not happy. They are certainly relieved if Israel would change its position regarding Ukraine. Yeah? They would, I don't have, special information, but I have absolutely no doubt that if there is this kind of change, active change in the Israeli position, the Americans will give the green light for the transfer of military technology, because you all know now that each time somebody wants to transfer weapons to Ukraine, it's not only a national decision. You have to ask permission from here and there. So the Americans will agree, but we'll see. So far, it has not yet been formalized. But I wouldn't have taught the same class 2 weeks ago. Things are moving, and I think they're moving in the good direction, in the positive direction. Yes, you have another question?
So Israel felt left by Americans after the takedown of Obama and the decision.
No. During the chemical bombing crisis, Israel was in fact supportive of the agreement to dismantle the Russian, the Syrian chemical arsenal, because as they were saying, this is the most significant weapon of mass destruction threat at their borders, the chemical arsenal of Assad. In fact, again, that was not a very bright move, because not only Bashar al-Assad had used the chemical weapons against his own population, and he went unpunished for that, but he lied. It's like Putin lied to me. Of course, Assad lied. Assad never dismantled this chemical arsenal. He always kept a significant part of it to use against the Syrian population repeatedly. It has been proven by various international investigation committees. So it's not, I hope I clarify that point. Something else? No? No question? So I move to the third point, oil and oligarchs. So, you remember the first class when I discussed Vladimir Assad and Bashar Putin. For this kind of system, mafia-like system, war can be a very significant economical opportunity. War economy is often something they prefer than a decent, productive economy. And the full-out invasion against Ukraine is really the proof of it. It could go in any handbooks about that. How do you handle war to maximize profits for your own ruling clique? Because the very war has provoked the skyrocketing of the oil prices, and the main beneficiaries have been Russia, Iran, and, as we will soon see, Saudi Arabia. So that meant that for Iran and Russia, you had significant additional resources that the regime is benefiting from. And you know that in those countries, the oil revenues are some kind of a state secret. You have official statistics, but most of the time they are meaningless because most of the oil revenues is directly channeled into the pockets of various partners in crimes of the local leader. So you have this war, despite the sanctions, and that was a way also to avoid the impact of the sanction, because of the oil revenues, increasing oil revenues, has been a bounty for Putin's regime. But it has also strengthened a partnership that was already there between Saudi Arabia, the main oil producer and exporter, so in fact the strategic decision maker when it comes to oil price, between Saudi Arabia, so Mohammed bin Salman, who is a prime minister, crown prince, and de facto ruler of the Saudi kingdom, because his father is in pretty bad physical and apparently mental health. So already Mohammed bin Salman had strengthened his relationship with Putin. The fact that Joe Biden criticized Mohammed bin Salman for the killing of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in horrible circumstances. The fact that during his campaign, he said, I will treat Mohammed bin Salman as a pariah. Well, when he was elected, he had a oil problem because now, of course, you know, America doesn't rely anymore on Saudi oil for its own consumption, but it relies critically on Saudi Arabia in order to fix the oil price, which is a significant factor for the US economy, no matter how much oil is produced domestically in America. So, the same way Joe Biden went in Israel last July and was very frustrated by what he found over there and could not achieve anything when it comes to a political or diplomatic process, he was even more frustrated when he went on from Israel to Saudi Arabia, when he had a check. They didn't shake hands, they had a check with Mohammed bin Salman, because obviously none of them wanted to shake the hand of the other. It was not only for post-COVID reasons. And he pleaded for Mohammed bin Salman to make a gesture to lower the price of oil, which is, Saudi Arabia can do it tomorrow. They can put few millions barrels a day on the market, which would have immediately sent the price down. And Saudi Arabia refused. They practically humiliated the US president on that day. Because not only he couldn't announce anything from Saudi Arabia, but even after that, you know, Saudi Arabia collaborated with Russia to maintain the highest possible oil rate. So you have this oil connection. Then you have the oligarchs. And you know, again, the strong connection between oil and oligarchs. That doesn't mean that all oligarchs work in oil, but the oil is a distinctive feature in the racketeering economy, mafia-style economy that Russian oligarchs are feeding on. No? So Joe Biden had a problem in the Middle East with Saudi Arabia, but also, and we are just talking about Israel, but when it comes to the Arab autocrats, most of them, even the ones who are supposed to be pro-West, in fact, they feel closer mentally, philosophically, politically to Putin than to Biden. Most of them have welcomed Putin. in a very with a lot of protocol, with a lot of respect, with they treated him really like a world leader, and this of course was not and it's regrettable, but this is the sad truth. It didn't change significantly with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But among all those Arab states, I want to insist on one, which is the United Arab Emirates, because Abu Dhabi and Dubai are now the sanctuary for the Russian oligarchs who are under sanctions by America or in Europe. The real estate market in Dubai has doubled during the past year, and it's a direct consequence of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This is where the money laundering of the Russian oligarchs is really running full speed, and they have a great laugh. And you know, by the way, it's 1 or 2 hours from Moscow or Sochi. It's very close for them. So the fact that they are able to switch from London or Switzerland or Monaco to Dubai makes the life of the oligarchs pretty easy. And as we know, once we can get over all the rhetorics of the Putin regime, what really matters for them is their survival, their prosperity, and the way they can live the good life. And in Dubai, they still live a very good life, because the financial system in Dubai is in the so-called gray area, gray zone, where in fact a lot of possibility of money laundering and other facilities are available. And the United Arab Emirates, they say, oh, we want to stay neutral. Well, it's not only neutral, because now maybe it's over. If it's over, it's only yesterday. You had one of the biggest armament show in the world, which is called IDEX, which is at Dubai. And you had a huge Russian pavilion that was there, presenting the last generation of the war machine of Putin. Personally, I think it's unacceptable, and that the idea that Dubai could keep on business as usual. There was even this tragic irony that you had in Dubai the Universal exhibition during the full-scale invasion with the Russian house and the Ukrainian house, as though nothing was happening, as though it was, we are living in a peaceful world. I think this kind of supposed neutrality is not acceptable, because it's not a neutrality. It's a strategic support, as I told you, to the oligarchs and to Putin's war machine. And there is a dimension that is even more critical, which is Kadyrov's dimension. So Ramzan Kadyrov, as you know, the Chechen dictator, who inherited Chechnya from his father, the way Bashar al-Assad inherited Syria from his father. He has been put in charge of Chechnya by Putin himself at the death of his father. He has been elected in 2007 and is, as you know, not only one of the biggest supporters of Putin, but he's also a key member of the radical camp in Russia that want to wage an all-out war against Ukraine, with all those quote-unquote irregulars, Kadyrovtsi, the Wagner. So the Russian army can blame them for the horrendous crimes committed in Ukraine against the Ukrainian people, and they can say, oh, they are irregular, but at the same time, they are boasting of various atrocities. And Kadyrov is like at home in the United Arab Emirates. He's treated like a special guest. He can organize the events, is attending a sport competition. Maybe you don't know, but free fight is very important in the Kadyrov system because it's a way through free fight, MMA, mixed martial arts, to recruit people who are now being sent. 3 or 4 of them will go to MMA championship, but most of them will be sent to Ukraine. So all this is happening in the United Arab Emirates, and I think that a consistent policy of blaming and shaming the Emirates in order to force them to change this support, this de facto support for Russian aggression against Ukraine is needed. So when I say that, people can answer, oh, but United Arab Emirates, if they don't want, they won't. No. I just published a book about the history of drugs in the Middle East. And until recently, the most notorious drug dealers in Europe were living happily in Dubai. And all the European police, Interpol was sending red notice to the Emiratis, were saying, oh, we don't know, no, maybe yes, but they didn't cooperate. Until some kind of friendly pressure was exerted, and slowly, those drug barons have been transferred to France, to Italy, to other European countries, and this is fortunately over. So I think that, and that will be the end of this third and last point of my fourth and last class, that Ukraine is fighting fiercely a war on the ground. But you all know better than me that this is a global war. At this moment, there is a diplomatic battle at the United Nations General Assembly in order for President Zelensky to promote his peace initiative and to have the maximum support as the General Assembly, because there would be a Russian veto at the Security Council. So a global war has to be fought on all fronts, but I think the Middle East is key for all the reasons I presented in the past classes, and insisting now, I think, on this priority for the United Arab Emirates. So that was my third point. Questions, remarks, demands, requests, clarification? Yes?
Just about this last triangle between Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, and the position of USA and Russia in this relation. Well, as I know, Saudi Arabia is also having a lot of help, military help from the USA, and they are also one of the main allies in the Middle East. But as Saudis are not friends with Israelis and also not friends with Iranians, and a lot of ways too. So how do this relation progress and when it's hard?
So it's not, but Russia is playing very smartly and consistently on the weakness of the triangle you just described, because as I just presented, it is blackmailing Israel by saying, I will protect you from Iran in Syria. And we know that it's quite the contrary. He's saying to the Saudis, I can rein the Iranian regional ambition. And as we know, that's not exactly the truth, but the Saudis are buying it. And in fact, they probably trust more Putin than Biden when it comes to dealing with Iran. And they are playing on the fact that Israel and Saudi Arabia are collaborating, but secretly, and probably will not make their collaboration official for various reasons in Saudi Arabia, the most important one being the fact that any Saudi ruler is supposed to be the protector of the holy sites of Islam. So you have Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia, but you have also, of course, Jerusalem, and giving the impression that you are conceding to the Israeli occupation would be probably very difficult to bear for any Saudi ruler. So that's it. So Putin is playing very smartly about this triangle. Why the Americans? Because it's a democracy, so they would prefer things to happen publicly. They call for open partnership between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and they cannot get it. They call for Israel to be more reactive against Russia and Syria, and they don't get it. And they call for international mobilization against Iran. And as we know, people are ready to hear that when it comes to nuclear threat, but they are not yet all ready to hear that when it comes to the Iranian drones in Ukraine. Please do.
I wanted to ask about Saudi Arabia, because it still seems to me that Saudi Arabia is connected to the United States economically much more than with Russia. And I wanted to ask which connection do you think is more significant, more important for Saudi Arabia, the economical one with the US or the mental one with Russia?
Well, it's a very significant question, important question, and I thank you for that, because it goes back to what I was saying, what you were even discussing, you and me, during the first class, about the difference between state and regime. Obviously, Saudi Arabia is ruled by the Saudi family, which is a regime. This regime extracts probably far more resources from the oil deal with the Russians than anything that comes from Washington. While the very regime, through various contracts, has pressure on the West, because they can say we can buy weapons, not buy weapons, invest in that bank, not invest in that bank. So the vulnerability, which is objective of Saudi Arabia, when it comes to the regime-to-regime relationship, is playing in the end of Russia. I hope I was clear enough. Thank you. Yes.
Question about the position of Saudi Arabia in the Arab world. So Saudi Arabia didn't take part in the 7 days war.
It was 6 days.
6 days.
In 67.
Is it correct?
Yes, but in fact, it was a war launched by Israel against Egypt, then Jordan, then Syria. So it was not a war of initiative. Yes, but after that, they supported at the so-called Khartoum Arab Summit the 3 no's: no to the recognition of Israel, no to the negotiation with Israel, and no to any peace settlement. So those 3 no's, in fact, gave a free rein to Israel. But the position officially moved in 2002 when they endorsed a peace plan, an Arab peace plan, that was supposed to give Israel the total peace with all the Arab states if Israel would withdraw from all the occupied Arab territories. But this plan was not accepted by Israel. So we are nearing the end of this class and of my course. So just going through the previous 3 classes. So remember the first class, how Vladimir Assad and Bashar Putin are really sharing the same world vision, because they inherited power. They come from the underworld of intelligence communities. They run mafia-like system. We saw in the second class the Syrian laboratory, the paralysis of the United Nations, the terror techniques that have been developed in Syria and then used against Ukraine, the targeting of the truth. That means the fake news is no collateral damage. It's at the center of a strategy. Middle East is a power generator, and America probably was very wrong to disengage from the Middle East leaving a power vacuum that has been filled by Putin and using Middle Eastern resources against Ukraine, first in Crimea and Donbass. So Ukraine, in my view, should develop its Middle East policy as a priority because, okay, the global South is an interesting concept, but there is no solidarity between the various partners of the global South. It's a category, it's a catch-all category. The Middle East is a priority. So, of course, you have now today's the very critical vote at the United Nations General Assembly. I do think that Ukraine could and should, in its diplomatic campaign, target the United Nations, of course, but it should target the United Arab Emirates for all the reasons I mentioned, and really don't hesitate to blame and shame the Emirati leaders until they change their position and stop supporting the Russian, stop supporting de facto the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Saudi Arabia could be also a target, for example, but very other dimensions could be used when it comes to Islamic solidarity and, of course, the Crimean Tatars and the way they are being oppressed by the occupying power. More generally, I try to present, and that was the very core of this teaching, how Ukraine, of course, is a part of Europe and has this European history, dimension, and ambition. But it's Ukrainian liberation struggle, Ukrainian now independence war for restoring its full sovereignty on its territory should be connected to the Middle East. And already, as I mentioned you, the fact that President Macron insisted on the Ukrainian dimension of the Iranian threat was probably critical to this beginning of evolution in the Israeli position. So this is the end of this class and this is the end of this course. I want to thank very, very warmly Tetiana Golichenko for welcoming me into this course and with you, a student. To thank Larissa Chovniuk, who was kind enough to attend this class today. Of course, President Serhiy Gvit, whom I had the honor to meet last Friday. Special thanks to Platon Soya, who have been so helpful, even lending me his computer, his laptop today, and always helping with a smile. Many thanks to all of you students, whether in the classroom or online, because you students, and I say it very sincerely, you are the reason why I'm here. You are the reason why I designed especially for you this course. I will be back. I hope, after the victory, since we all hope the victory will happen very soon, and the sooner, the better. You deserve this victory because you are, at any level and every walk of life, dedicated to this collective resistance. It's a spirit of daily resistance that really impressed me during those weeks in Kiev. And I try to convey in Le Monde, in the columns I publish every Sunday. I try to convey to the media. I've been interviewed in the media, French and international. I was even interviewed by Korean TV day before yesterday. I try to convey this feeling to my colleagues at Sciences Po, the students at Sciences Po, your fellow students at Sciences Po, the alumni at Sciences Po. As you know, Sciences Po stands very strongly in solidarity with you at the Mohila, and my course, my presence, was only one gesture among many displays of solidarity. You can contact me anytime. You have all my email. I will be there with you, even from afar, after you honored me in welcoming me among you during that month of February. Slava Ukraini.